我是中国美术学院跨媒体艺术学院网络社会研究所王静杰，今天由我为大家主持，谢谢。首先进行开幕致辞，有请跨媒体艺术学院闵汉院长。
各位尊敬的嘉宾、讲者，大家早上好。首先，请允许我代表中国美术学院跨媒体艺术学院，向各位的莅临表示最热烈的欢迎和由衷的感谢。欢迎来到第10届网络社会年会。10年，在媒介演进的漫长历史中，或许只是短暂的一瞬，但是对于网络社会而言，却意味着一次深刻的跃迁。我们见证了从信息互联到数据爆炸，从 Web 2.0的开放平台到如今人工智能的强势崛起。今天我们站在这个重要的时间节点，来共同面对年会的主题：互联网之中 ，AI 爱来不来？这并非是一个简单的提问，而是指向一个时代的核心的问题。它所指向的是，当我们曾经无比信赖的连接、交互和信息流动的模式，正在被一股全新的技术力量所颠覆和重塑时，我们所必须进行的反思和重置。这里所谓的“终”，并非毁灭，而是结构的塌陷和重组。所谓“来”，既是技术的到来，也是情感、伦理存在的再次来临。我们面对的 AI 不只是一个算法性的对象，它是一个被训练出来的平均人类，一个以概率为形式、以人类语言古老的情感词汇。在 AI 的时代，我们是否仍然懂得如何彼此理解，如何彼此共情？媒介的历史从来不是线性的，它在不同的载体之间分流、交织与转化。立足当下，在这个技术迅速演进的时代，我们如何回应过去，又如何理解现在这个时刻呢？
So think about art technology and also the boundary of the knowledge production has been redefined. So that is the space we're going to talk about how can we re-understand the relationship between internet and human beings. So think about AI, artificial intelligence. So you'll find that actually, so this has become the basic mirror of our average understanding. So it can create or simulate a lot of wow effect the scenarios. The strong capability of AI given the place when human can create our own creativities, we're thinking about how are we going to use AI. The AI we are proposing is pointing towards the fundamental a fantasy of technology as well as the philosophical caring. It's moving interwoven together. So this is going beyond the integration of art and science and technology. It is about in the process of in the Anthropocene and how can we establish the subjectivity of ourselves and so that we can.
我们的责任就是要在学科、文化、媒介的间隙中探索，去思考技术和艺术的连接与超越。网络社会年会一直致力于促进学者、艺术家、工程师、思想者和策展人之间的跨学科研究与跨领域实践。在面对潜在的冲突和危机时，我们如何自我组织，建立起全新的阵地和堡垒？我们将通过批判和思辨的讨论，来深入研究技术和文化之间的关系，来开启未来可能的发展路径。让我们在接下来的议程中，深入到政经批判、媒介和技术哲学的相关思考当中，共同探索和分享关于技术和文化的种种可能性，直面技术力量主导下的世界转变，为未来的发展提供新的思路和方向。最后，预祝第10届网络社会年会圆满成功，谢谢大家。
谢谢闵汉院长。下面有请网络社会研究所所长、会议总召黄孙权教授。
Okay, hi. It's a very warm welcome to Shanghai, and I will speak in Chinese because we have audience speaking Chinese. Okay, it's a long history, but I will make it short. It's very short. 这是我们第10届的网络社会年会了。这10年来，我们其实干了很多不同的事情啊。那最麻烦的事情是这10年过了，然后我们下一步要去哪里？对，我们要从这里开始，那我们怎么想未来10年会发生什么事情？那首先我想跟各位介绍一下我们这10年来做了什么事情。网络社会研究所其实是一个独立的institute， 然后在我们跨媒体学院的支持下，我们有一个国际的教学团体，然后有很多艺术家、curator、设计师。跟我们一起合作，当然还有一些国际很有名的学者。那第1届年会叫做Forces of Regulation 网络化的力量。那每一年我们大概都会邀请10到12位非常重要的学者参与这样。第二届叫做与列夫妇儿同行呢 ，Walk with Henry Lafave。我们那时候有很多讨论智能城市的规划，所以我们那时候重新思考什么叫做 Smart City。要有 Smart City 之前，是不是应该有 Smart Citizen？ 那有没有 Smart NGO？Something like that？ 这是我们第2届。第3届我们就非常直接的讨论 Intelligent Urban Fabric， 这是第3届。然后我们请了非常多来自荷兰、德国、日本还有中国阿里巴巴的。技术总监王坚，他就是做那个 City Brand， 也许你们听过，杭州一个非常有名的 City Brand 的计划，就是王坚老师发展。那第4届呢，我们叫网民21，因为这个是为什么叫网民21呢？这是中国开始有互联网21年的那一年，就开始有这个 Internet 在中国，所以我们叫做网民21，刚好21年后。我们思考一下，这个整个中国互联网的一些情况。第5届2020年叫做实践智慧之网，那这个是比较practical 的，比较实际的，然后比较有实验性的，所以我们把 Vitalik 也找来，有非常多的我们叫做 Crypto Punks， 就加密朋克的。Based on Jack， base 在捷克的一些加密朋克人一起来参加这个会啊，就在2020年左右。那接下来是这个时刻是比较特别，因为这时候刚好是疫情，所以那时候我们研究所做了2个比较重要的计划，一个是我们发展一个crypto coin， 叫做Co-op， 就 COOP。它是在我们一个艺术圈里头自己流传的一个 crypto coin， 然后那时候我们还做了很多 Web3 或者是 decentralized 的相见的保存计划，所以那一年我们其实透过这个东西发展出各种不同合作机制的东西。这第7届我们叫做，也许你们都知道，这是来自一个很有名的乐团的一个说法。Never mind the Queens, okay. Never mind the Web3. Here's the P2P. 所以今年我们找了非常多人，包含了 Internet Archive 的Keho， 还有很多香港 AAA 的主张的主理人，所以我们找了很多这样讨论 P2P 的情况。这是第7页。那第7页比较特别的是，除了这个主论坛以外，我们还在亚洲的7个城市同时办这个论坛，包含了武汉、杭州、上海、香港、北京，还有2个城市忘了在哪，反正就7个城市办的这个东西，所以这是我们说的那个panelist。 这是我们第一次尝试透过 P2P 来做一些群体连结的关系。这是我们第8届网络社会年会，叫做 Resetting All Impossibility of Technology。那这也在上海，这是第9届，我们到了清迈曼谷，我们跟清迈大学合作，找了非常多当地的华人跟亚裔的，来自印度尼西亚、泰国、新加坡各个搞这种Global South 研究的学者跟专家一起在清迈开的会。除了这个会以外，我们还搞了非常多 hackathon， 但我们这里搞的 hackathon 不是那个非常 technical 的 hackathon， 它比较我们叫做 art hackathon。所以这个 hackathon 我们会找很多艺术家、策展人、设计师，甚至管理者、博物馆馆长这种角色一起来做hackathon。那每一年都有一些非常不一样的尝试。那这是我们第2届 hackathon， 我们在很早的时候，在2006年左右，我就联合了香港，对不起，联合了台湾跟中国。台湾有台北的艺术大学。高雄的高雄师范大学跟杭州的快媒体学院，我们在2006年就请了唐凤，就是在亚洲非常有名的一个 hacker， 他后来成为台湾的数位部长，他带着两岸3地的学生做了一个你们现在比较流行的就是那种 AR 的设计哈，或是 VR 的设计。然后我们把教室放在空中，所有的人都可以上去上课，然后学习怎么操作VR 的软体，然后全部 base 在一个 open source 里头。我们那时候用的是各种不同的 open source 的工具来做这个事情。然后这也是在上海办的第一次，我们叫做 Cooperation and Hackathon， 绑在一块，然后专门是为了合作社，所以我们找了亚洲非常多的合作社组织一起跟我们考虑，在技术发展的过程里头，合作社跟人民可以做到做什么样的事情，所以这是比较特别的一个系列。然后再隔一年，我们又在7个城市，7可能是我很着迷的一个数字，所以每一次我在办活动都会找7个城市来做。我们在杭州、台北、高雄、香港、武汉，还有每一个地方大概找了10几个合作社，所以大概全亚洲区域有70多个合作社参加这个计划。那为什么要做这个事情？是我们想具体知道合作社需要什么东西，以至于我们的程序员、我们的设计师、我们的艺术家可以帮助这个社区做一些什么事情。所以我们有一个非常好的实验的效果。然后做完合作社以后，我们就到了香港中文大学参加2018年的亚洲第一个 PCC 的平台，就是平台合作主义大会。那时候是跟邱鼎川老师合作的。那这是我们那时候去香港办的一个 hackathon。这个就是2018年的 PCC 大会的东西。然后我那时候也带了非常多的中国的合作社跟农民到了香港参加 PCC 大会，然后让更多人知道中国有非常多草根的、强有力的、由村民组织的合作社团体。然后除了这个以外，我们还搞了一个 writing 的 hackathon， 叫做 sci-fi song fiction， 就把很多优秀的年轻的作家关在一起48小时，然后强迫他们写一个故事给我们，这个叫做sci-fi song。OK， 你们帮我看一下这个答案吗？这个麦克风声音设计是什么？
So there is a pop-up window.
OK， 这是我们下一个hackathon，叫做艺人松，这是2023年很近的。我们那时候因为大家都在谈那个 intelligent， 所以我们谈的是 artificial intelligence， 所以我们故意把这个字给拆开，让这个artificial 变成是个 artificial。Sorry for that, I don't know why. Too much machine. Okay, I will make a very short film for that。能把这个关掉吗？这是短OK。然后过去的10年好像非常快，好像几乎在瞬息之间我们就翻页了。那互联网目前遭遇到非常多的挑战，它跟我一开始我们这一代人是从完全没有互联网，从电话拨接，然后到现在为止，然后有5G 讯号的那。所以对我来说，有一个非常关键的问题，就未来10年我们可以去哪里，或者我们怎么想象，怎么做这个事。所以这是我们今年年会的4个 panel 的主题哦。这4个主题我们并没有明确的答案，我们也不知道该怎么办，所以才需要各位的学者跟各位参与的年轻的讨论，给我们一些充分的讨论跟discuss 跟提醒哦。那第一个我们叫做 the quiet editor， 一个静默编辑。静默编辑我特别想要举一个人，也许这个人都知道，这个叫 Jack。OK， 他其实一开始在 SRI 工作，后来到了大学去工作。他做的一个事情是那时候的我们说那个网址啊 ，domain name 跟 IP， 它其实是要人工核对的，很像一个电话簿一样。比如说 CNN-ins.org， 它应该对应到 IP 是162.178之类的。那时候其实没有办法自动找到这个位置，所以我们需要一个 editor 在网络世界里头做这个事情。很少人知道他的名字，可是如果没有他，我们哪里都去不了。这就是我所谓的 quiet editor，OK？而现在不太一样了。以前我们在 Web 1时代，我们可以看到很多人发表自己的文章。到 Web 2.0时代，我们既可以写也可以读。可到 Web 3就变得非常麻烦了，因为 Web 3很多人觉得我写了，我可以写，我可以读，我可以拥有那个财产，这是 Web 3的一个精神。但大部分的时候呢，如果我们问一个 AI 问题，我们其实不知道是谁写的，我们也不知道编辑是谁，我们找不到 Jack 已经永远消失了，我们并不知道谁在 editing 我们跟世界的关系。所以这是我们第一个 panel 想要讨论的，就是在这个情况下，我们如何再找到 Jack， 或者 Jack 这个角色本来是作为人类跟世界资讯沟通的一个非常重要的角色，当这个角色不见了，我们该怎么思考？第二个就是gradient rent， 这其实是政治经济学非常经典的问题。我只想给各位看一下。这个在中国是一个新的政策，叫做 East Data West Computing， 叫东数西算。也就是说，中国现在大部分的计算机公司都 base 在北京、杭州、深圳，但是我们大部分的云端的算力的公司都 base 在贵州、四川、西藏。所以你可以看到，西部好像是专门做运算的，然后供给东部。做各种软体的开发什么等等，你可以看到在地理学上这种空间差距会影响越来越大。这是我想全世界应该都是这样的问题，所以这是我们非常关心的事情之一。第二个就是我们要讨论基建。 在中国基建是特别明显的。我们很多人都觉得云端，各位可能知道，云并不是在云上，云是在地上的。我们需要透过非常大的电力的供给，我们需要有很好的计算机的中心，我们需要很多海底电缆才可以让 cloud 所谓的 cloud 成型。但是 cloud 其实会耗费非常多的能量。当区块链那时候非常红的时候，或加密货币非常红的时候，很多人批评说加密货币是非常耗能源的，对吧？每天在运算赚钱。但是各位没有想 AI， 每一次我们在 AI 上问一个问题，它消耗的电量可能不低于我们在比特币挖矿时候的电量。任何一个无聊的问题问 AI， 可能都会让地球消耗几度的电，因为它背后是一个非常大的computation 的 power。那另外也是在中国有非常大的数据中心都盖在贵州，这是华为中国一个非常大的电话跟计算机公司，他们在贵州做了很多这种云上贵州的东西。你可以看右上角的图，它其实这个云上屯数据中心有分成好几块在不同的地方。这是另外一家腾讯公司，也是在贵州的7星的数据中心。就中国在西部上有非常多这样的数据中心，其实都非常大那这也是我们现在的事实，我们现在正面临一个急速的转变。那最后一个就是 the work is prompt， 这是我们艺术家最关心的事情。我们昨天请了罗霄来讲，给我们一个 talk。他作为一个算法艺术家，他一直坚持说，即便你用 AI 创作，都还是保有艺术家的主体性。所以他举很多例子但我想待会 Nick 会告诉我们更多这样的故事，就我们怎么思考艺术家。当我们在用 AI 创作的时候，我们到底还算不算艺术家？我们有没有作者性？我们有没有艺术性？如果我只能够掌握规则，但最后的风格跟样貌其实不是我最后决定的，那我还可以说我是艺术家吗？像这样的问题，也就是说，这整个创造的过程已经变成是一个可以教的、可以对谈的 prompt。那么我们到底艺术家怎么样？我们怎么样安置艺术的新的角色？那最后一个就是，当我刚刚说，如果当一个外形跟风格其实是一个自动生产的，那么艺术的这种艺术性跟艺术的公共性到底意味着什么？比如说我们在用很多 AI 的图像生产的东西，但我们都知道每一张 AI 的 base 后面的图像都是来源于某一个真实的人所拍的或被拍的东西。但当我们在使用这些图像生产新的艺术作品的时候，我们其实并没有征求那些曾经被强迫提供数据或图像，或是主动提供图像的同意。那这会变成是一个非常复杂的伦理问题。那最后，我希望我们这个会能够以这4个开端作为一个开始，稍微重新想想看我们整个互联网历史的过程。我们需要一些反思，我们需要回想，而且我觉得最重要的是，我们应该重新讨论一些非常古典的问题，比如说什么是公共性，什么是私益，而且我们应该在一个机器构筑的世界里头重新讨论政治性是什么。那我觉得这是我们研究所跟我们跨媒体学院非常关心的事情，也是我们未来10年应该要做的事情。我希望在这个会议头可以透过来我们年会的学者，还有青年学者们，可以在这个议题上给我们更多清晰的批判也好，建议也好，或提出一条可以向往的道路。这样，好，我的发言就到这里，谢谢各位。
感谢闵汉院长和黄宗全教授的开幕致辞。首先有请发言嘉宾迪伦·雷比林导演，他是一位加拿大电影导演，作品关注技术、政治与文化的交汇。他目前正在开发关于数字未来、技术前沿与政治思想的新项目。他的演讲主题是：追问基础设施 平台预测与提示词，有请。
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to thank you in advance for your patience. This is my first ever PowerPoint presentation, so I'm sure it's going to go very smoothly, and I'm not going to have any hiccups at all. I was hoping you guys would have the big screen, but apparently that wasn't going to happen, so I'll do with what we've got. Okay, yeah, so as I was introduced, I'm a filmmaker working at the intersection of art, technology, national security, and politics. In the past, my documentary work has included television series and documentaries for places like National Geographic, Vice, History, and Discovery. So thanks for having me. It's great to be back at the Institute for the Institute of Network Society Conference. Sorry, I'm just going to the mise en scène correct. I'm not sure if you saw a picture of me back there. I actually attended the conference back in 2000. I teleported in from my COVID apartment in Toronto. And this is an interesting moment for me. At the conference in 2020, I was on a panel discussing a research project that I was just beginning. I was diving deep into the world of the decentralization movement with the intent of making it into a film. Okay, I know how to do this. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to spoil the ending. The decentralization movement. This movement, some people call it DWeb, is a very loose collective of people scattered around the world. It's a group interested in building hardware and software systems that are decentralized, distributed, or federated using tools like blockchains, smart contracts, distributed hashtags, I assure you I know what all of this stuff is, and disintermediated identifiers. It's closely aligned with Web3, although in my experience you have to be very careful about what names you use with what people. If you make the mistake of calling a DWeb person a DeFi person, they will not be happy with you. So the decentralization movement takes a different approach to technology than we're used to in mainstream discourse, choosing to view technology primarily through the lens of power. It examines shifts that are happening in our world, social, economic, and political, and examines the role that network technology plays in instigating those shifts. A driving concern for the movement is the way that centralized technologies, such as corporate platforms and internet service providers, serve to concentrate power in the hands of a small group of elites. As a way of countering these forces, this movement believes that decentralized technology, with its different structures of organization and flattened hierarchical configurations, offers an escape hatch from these relationships of digital dominance and subservience. All of this is compelling material for a discussion, or hopefully a keynote. But back at the 2020 conference, I spoke about the challenges of wrestling these big ideas into the poetic form of a documentary film. At that point in time, I had done the primary research, I met with people at conferences, I dove deep into the literature, I looked at the theory, and gained an understanding of the technology, but I was stuck with a big dilemma. Could this even be a film? Maybe it would make a great article, or book, or blog post, but the form, structure, and texture of a documentary remained elusive to me at the time. How do you fit these large, abstract ideas into an engaging work of art? Especially in a medium like film, one that prizes concrete visual phenomena and begs to communicate beyond the trappings of just language. Well, 5 years have passed, and those initial ideas and research have become my first feature-length documentary, The End of the Internet. I hope you can come to the screening at this conference later on today, and if you do, maybe you can tell me whether it should have just been an article, book, or a blog post instead. I'm going to be talking a lot about the film, so when you watch it today, you'll know a little bit more about it. So just this afternoon when we screen it, try to look surprised. Either way, my film is about the past, present, and potential future of the internet and the competing ideologies that undergird it. The journey to make this film was a complex one for me, and it taught me many lessons. But there's one big one I'd like to share with you today. We must interrogate infrastructure, because it is a means for understanding ourselves, our values, and our political commitments. This was something that I learned as I embedded with the characters of my film. As I followed their efforts to build decentralized technology, I watched as they agonized over infrastructure design, poring over architectures, protocols, physical construction of network systems. I too started to see how changes in infrastructure can allow for different formations of politics, economies, and even imaginations. For my own artistic journey, I started to understand how looking at infrastructure could render abstract ideas into tangible material constructions, making the invisible visible. Suddenly, a film began taking shape. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll take you back to the origin of this project in hopes that it sheds light on how I arrived at this approach and why this journey can be informative moving forward. So back in 2017, I had just finished working on a documentary series for Vice called Cyber War. It was a show about hacking, politics, and national security. After 30 episodes, the series came to an end, and I was looking for new stories to tell. So I took a trip to Prague, as one does, to attend the Hackers Congress run by an organization called Parallelny Polis, like Parallel Society. It was a conference dedicated to crypto anarchy, the idea that cryptographic technology held emancipatory potential. The belief was and is that by increasing privacy and security through the use of cryptographic tools, we could disrupt the mechanisms that allow centralized platforms to exercise censorship, surveillance, and corporate control over our data. In doing so, the idea goes, we can establish our own personal sovereignty through digital means. The Congress was a wild mix of discussions, panels, screenings, and lectures from people who were wrestling with these ideas, both from left-wing and right-wing perspectives. The timing was important. The summer of 2017 was the height of the initial coin offering boom, where people and organizations were raising previously unimaginable amounts of money for their blockchain projects through coin offerings. Instead of selling a tangible item, a startup sells a digital token that represents a future utility or a share in the project. People were issuing tokens and raising funds and turning blockchain tokens into fiat windfalls. At the time, Bitcoin had reached the unthinkable height of $4,000 US per Bitcoin. I remember seeing a tweet that we've reached $4,000 and having my mind blown. I'm not sure what it is now, but I think the last time I checked it was 110,000 American dollars. So the people who were rich back then are super rich now. So yeah, the coffers of all these entrepreneurs were full. Add to that a zero interest rate environment, and you had the perfect conditions for technological research, experimentation, and adventurism. The projects that these Bitcoin beneficiaries were developing were bold, exciting, and weird, and regulation was nowhere on the horizon. It was a heady fever dream of technology and capital being directed toward new social, legal, and economic formations. So amidst the chaos of the conference, a hacker pulled me aside. He knew I was a filmmaker searching for a story. But he said to me, I know Bitcoin seems exciting, but Bitcoin is not the story. Decentralization is the story. The line stuck with me. Was there something below the hood of Bitcoin that could offer greater insight into political futures? The question nagged at me. I went home and began to research in earnest. At the time, there was very little literature on the experience. The worst sin that you can make in documentary filmmaking is what artist Theo Anthony calls visual podcasts. A director strings together a series of talking heads, delivering a premeditated script, and then slaps a bunch of stock footage over top of it. You've probably seen it before, a film where an expert tells you what to think as you are flooded with random images of hackers typing on generic keyboards, or a faceless crowd with a bunch of pop-up squares floating over top of them. Maybe there's a Matrix-style digital rain floating down as a series of sound bites weave their way through the soundtrack. There's a reason for this approach. The digital world is hard to show. Everything happens inside of black boxes or inside the ethereal realm of ideas. I was facing that problem. The shift from centralized to decentralized system architecture shouldn't look like anything. I realized early on that there was never going to be a big red flashing light that suddenly turns green. Voila, the internet is decentralized. A peer-to-peer network should function the same way as a centralized network. It just might be a little bit slower. So what could I actually show? The answer came from the movement itself. The people I was filming with were obsessed with infrastructure, with the physical and technical systems that shape how we connect. They believe that if you want to understand power, you have to look under the hood, at the architecture, the cables, the code. That insight became my method, too. So I began to turn my camera towards the physical infrastructure of the internet. The wires, the cables, the data centers, the antenna. We're asked to think of the internet as a cloud, an invisible ether that is everywhere and nowhere. But the internet is not ethereal. It has a body with weight, geography, and consequence. And if I could draw attention to these concrete buildings and fiber optic tentacles of the internet, I could start making this abstract power visible. Originally, I was going to show you some clips from the film, but I don't want to spoil anything, so you are stuck with still images. The through line of this film, the through line of this film is the work of artist Mario Santamaria. Mario is an interdisciplinary artist who focuses on the influence of communication technologies on our world. One of his most popular projects are his internet tours, where he takes people on a walking tour of cities, pointing out the unseen or hidden cables, wires, and antennas. Mario uses this as a way to discuss the roles that these technologies play in our lives. The appearance of a 5G antenna tower disguised as an organic tree that could signal a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. The route of an underground cable can be traced back through history and reveal that it followed the route of a historical slave trading thoroughfare. These physical traces can open our eyes to the influences we may not have experienced. It can open our eyes to the structures of power. The moment that you trace the moment you trace the line of a fiber optic cable, you begin to understand its material reality. A corporation dug a hole in the street to bury a cable that connects every house on the street. There's a vested interest in that cable, serving the interest of capital. A company built this warehouse that holds 10,000 servers and hosts over a petabyte of data. There's a vested interest in that warehouse, serving the interest of capital. Whether you use this infrastructure to download SpongeBob SquarePants memes or watch your favorite Twitch streamer, there's a vested interest in this infrastructure, serving the interest of capital. Another artist I filmed with was a photographer named DJ Meisner. DJ's work is also concerned with tracing the tendrils of the internet, but his work takes a more forensic turn. One of his ongoing projects involves using thermal photography to document internet infrastructure, data centers, relay stations, and points of interconnection. Through the thermal lens, these sites glow like organs in a living, breathing monster. The images reveal what's normally invisible, the heat signatures of power, the flow of energy and capital coursing through a network. I followed DJ to a series of these locations: industrial parks, remote bunkers, nondescript utility buildings, humming behind unmarked fences. Each site told its own story about hierarchy and control. Who gets access? Who is kept out? Who owns the infrastructure that keeps our digital lives running? His practice reminded me that even when systems are opaque, traces of power always leak through the image, if you know how to look. Through Mario and DJ, we see that infrastructure isn't just a technical system, it's an ecosystem of power. It reflects the ideologies of those who build it and the economies that sustain it. What began as a film about a movement became something larger, an investigation into how the skeleton of our digital world came to look the way it does and what values it encodes. Getting ahead of myself. With some of these key building blocks in place, I began to expand my scope of interest beyond just physical infrastructure. I wanted to explore questions of network design choices that go into infrastructure. Here I'm speaking of the architectural logic of networks, the protocols and network topologies. So woven through the end of the internet is an excavation into the early design decisions of the internet, the infrastructural choices that shape the means by which data could be exchanged efficiently through networks. The story begins during the Cold War. An American engineer named Paul Barron was working at the Rand Corporation, a military think tank that primarily designed solutions for the American Department of Defense. I guess it's the American Department of War now. Tasked with designing a communications network that could survive a nuclear strike, Barron imagined decentralized and distributed architectures, networks that could reroute around damage, resist attack, and survive disruption. Perhaps you've seen his famous diagram before. I found it everywhere I went. People sketched this design on napkins, put it up on whiteboards, and even framed it as a poster and hung it on their walls. Barron's design solved a technical problem, but also a political one. Barron had devised a system without a single point of failure, but this necessarily involved building a network without a single sovereign entity. For a military used to centralized command and control infrastructures with strong top-down hierarchies, this was revolutionary. As these ideas moved from military research into academia with the creation of ARPANET, they collided with the optimism of the counterculture. In San Francisco, figures like Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Catalog community saw in these networks the promise of non-hierarchical communication. As they struggled against the 1950s monoculture of office work with bureaucratic bosses monitoring and controlling every aspect of their job, these new kinds of systems could open the door for a new kind of structure, digital commons that could bypass bureaucracy and empower individuals. The design of the network carried with it an ideological charge. Decentralization is freedom. But as powerful as these ideas were in the abstract, they're also fragile in the face of concrete reality. When the World Wide Web emerged in the 1990s, its architecture, open, extensible, and largely unregulated, invited a new wave of commercial actors. The same decentralized system that once promised emancipation became a substrate for enclosure. Platforms and service providers inserted themselves into the communication ecosystem. As middlemen, taking some of the burden of network maintenance and growth off the hands of the user by offering curation, aggregation, and authentication, the platforms and service providers layered themselves on top of open protocols. Yes, they were creating efficiencies, but also new choke points for control and profit. The design decisions that made the internet resilient also made it exploitable. What began as a network built for survival became a network optimized for extraction of data, attention, profit, and power. In Alexander Galloway's book, Protocol, he talks about coding being the art of possibility. When you code something, you define a world and what can happen in it. And because of this, every protocol and architecture carries with it an implicit worldview, an assumption about how power should be distributed, who gets to participate, and who is left out. In a way, programming is an exercise in building a utopia, a world where everything works as designed for the benefit of those who built it. But utopias are complicated, often carrying within them an equal and opposing dystopia. Early network designs imagined openness and resilience, but once these systems met the marketplace, openness became a business model, and resilience became a sales pitch. Infrastructures that were once public goods were recoded as private property. Look at these badasses. As part of my research, I spoke with Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, the principal architects of the TCP/IP protocol stack. To this day, TCP/IP remains the foundational system that allows bits of information to move across the internet. As I delved deeper into the design of the internet's infrastructure, I wanted to understand whether there was anything in the logic of TCP/IP itself that might have contributed to the centralization of power that we see today. So I called them up and I asked them a cheeky question. Was there something about the design of the TCP/IP protocol that made the rise of giant platforms inevitable? Vint Cerf gave me a surprising answer. He asked me to think back to the days before the internet, in the era of mainframes and timeshare computing. He said that those systems were also centralized, and not because of ideology, but because of scale. In other words, centralization wasn't born from the protocol, it was born from scale. The more users and data a system must handle, the greater the incentive to consolidate resources, control, and computation. It was a reminder that even the most open designs can bend towards centralization once they collide with scale and with markets. And this is where technical logic meets economic logic. The protocol itself, TCP/IP, didn't choose centralization, but the market did. The pursuit of efficiency, reliability, and profit shaped the network's open design to something more hierarchical. What began as a system built for resilience evolved into one optimized for capture. The ideas of distributed communication were not undone by technology, but the conditions around it, by the way scale, capital, and convenience rewire our infrastructures from the inside out, from top down. But for every system that bends towards the center, there are people pushing back, trying to redirect that gravity. The people I follow in my film are living at this intersection between infrastructure as a tool of emancipation and infrastructure as an instrument of capital. Each of them is, in their own way, rewriting the political and economic code that underlies the network, showing that interrogating infrastructure isn't just about cables or code, but about the values we build into the systems that connect us. This is a fuzzy picture of one of the guys from my film. This is Ramon Roca. So, as part of my film, I went to the Catalonia region of Spain to meet with Ramon. Ramon is a telecommunications engineer who became disillusioned with the corporate control of connectivity in Spain. In 2004, he launched GiphyNet, a grassroots mesh network that now connects tens of thousands of people across northern Spain. Also a fuzzy image that, this is an image of GiphyNet. It was built on a simple idea that internet access should be a collective right, not a commodity. By pooling resources and sharing nodes, communities could build and maintain their own infrastructure. Like the way GiphyNet works is anyone can join the network, but the promise that you have to make is that by joining the network, you promise to share the network with anybody else who wants it. So what this means is there's no centralized internet service provider. You're getting your internet from your neighbor rather than a fiber optic cable run by a centralized Telefonica, for example. So Ramon's work turns connectivity itself into a political act. It shows how rethinking the physical and social infrastructure of the internet can become an act of resistance, a way to reclaim autonomy from market logic. Next, I went to Berlin to meet Elektra Wagenrad, a hacker, engineer, and longtime activist in Germany's Freifunk movement. Freifunk began as a community wireless project using open source routers to build local peer-to-peer networks. For Elektra, these networks aren't just technical systems, they're expressions of an anarchist vision of mutual aid. Elektra lives in sort of the trailer community that you see behind her. And living off the grid, she had difficulty tapping into conventional internet infrastructures, so she built her own internet infrastructure. She believes that building internet infrastructure is a form of politics. If you don't like the system, build your own. Freifunk reimagines the humble Wi-Fi router as a tool for solidarity, connecting neighbors directly without corporate intermediaries. In Elektra's world, the network becomes not just a means of communication, but a way of living together, a social contract embedded in code and hardware. Yeah, this is an image from the Freifunk, or from the anarchist squat that she lives in. So from Berlin, I went to the Brazilian Amazon, where I met with Luandro Vieira, a technologist working with indigenous communities to build digital tools for self-determination. Luandro helps deploy Mapio, which is an open source mapping platform that allows communities to document their land, resources, and traditions, all while keeping that data offline outside of corporate servers. His work is actually very important. The way he describes it to me is there's a need from these communities to catalog where the fish are, where the hunting grounds are, where medicinal plants are, anything that they need for resources, but there's a clear and distinct danger of allowing that data to leak online. Forestry companies, mining companies are all interested in this data. So how do you maintain a database that you can only share with people in your direct community? Luandro's work is part of a larger question. Who owns information? Who gets access to it? By designing tools that don't rely on cloud platforms, Luandro helps indigenous communities protect their knowledge from extraction, digital as well as material. Mapio turns infrastructure into a form of defense, a way of asserting sovereignty in a world where even data has become a frontier. Finally, I went to the United States to meet with the people developing Urbit. There's a little bit of, I wasn't allowed to film inside the conference itself, so here's some cryptic images to whet your appetite for the film later on. Urbit is a decentralized computing platform created by the controversial theorist Curtis Yarvin, and it's now developed by a network of technologists and investors. On the surface, Urbit shares the same ideals as the other ones I was just describing: autonomy, self-hosting, independence from big tech, but it also reveals a different side of decentralization. Urbit can be used to build closed, self-contained enclaves, online communities that isolate rather than engage. It reminds us that the same technologies that promise liberation can also enable withdrawal and even authoritarianism in miniature. Each of these stories, Ramon, Electra, Luandro, and Urbit, reveal a different political reality of infrastructure. They show that decentralization isn't a moral position or a technological guarantee. It's a terrain of struggle. The network is not neutral. It's a living space where values are coded, contested, and lived. That realization became the core of my film, The End of the Internet. What began as an investigation into the decentralization movement evolved into something broader, an exploration of how technical infrastructure itself becomes a mirror for human intent. Whether physical or digital, every system we build carries traces of our politics, our economies, and our imaginations. As a filmmaker, I learned that making those invisible systems visible wasn't just an aesthetic exercise, but a political one. To reveal infrastructure is to reveal power, who has it, who's excluded from it, and how it circulates beneath the surface of everyday life. The moral, if there is one, is that technology is never neutral. It can be a weapon or a tool depending on how it's designed, who maintains it, and what values we allow to guide it. We must examine it closely or we risk letting the systems decide for us. And more often than not, that means abdicating our social and political desires to the logic that is building, maintaining, and deploying these machines, the logic of capitalism. Just as a side note, I've been screening my film at film festivals around the world, and I think for all the people in this room, a lot of these ideas are very familiar. It's part of everyone's work. But what has happened at every screening that I've been to is after the screening, I'll be approached by a programmer or a coder who will come to me and say, yeah, I come from computer science or I come from programming. I had no idea that technology could be political. I was like, I just spoke with someone who built a machine for scraping social media data to prevent landlords or prevent people from getting a good score with their landlords and stuff like that. It's like, how can any of this stuff not be political? So just get a reality check that we all think this, but it's not necessarily familiar to everyone else. So that brings us to today, the burgeoning world of artificial intelligence. I'm going to admit right out of the gate that this is a bit out of my wheelhouse. I've been focusing my brain on decentralized technology for the last 5 years, so I'm very eager to learn from everyone today and maybe make another film about artificial intelligence in 5 years. All that being said, perhaps some of the lessons that I learned from my last film can point me in the right direction for the next one. So the framing of today's panels and discussions is the quiet editor and how AI interfaces are beginning to shape and constrain our world. The way we used to interface with knowledge was through provenance, processing, and proscription, through primary texts and interpretation based around social institutions and shared consensus. Now, it's through prompts and predictions. If making my film taught me anything, it's that infrastructure shapes and constrains our relationship to text in the world, and that we must closely look at infrastructure of AI itself to understand what's going on. So looking at the history of AI infrastructure design reveals two main and competing schools of logic: symbolic AI and connectionism. Symbolic AI sought to encode logic and facts so that computers could reason. You put a bunch of facts and rules into a machine and can start making sense of them. On the other hand, connectionism, championed by Geoffrey Hinton, took a different path. The idea is that you feed enough data into a system and it will begin to recognize patterns and replicate them. For years, Geoffrey Hinton's connectionism was dismissed. Until the mid-2000s, when the rise of cheap GPUs and the deluge of data from social media made neural networks viable. Suddenly, we entered the current age of AI, powered by vast compute clusters and data pipelines. And the results are remarkable. With a simple prompt, a chatbot can now suggest how to cook a meal, what car has a trunk big enough to fit your mountain bike, or how to structure an argument. But what does it mean that the second school of thought, one that values pattern and predictions over reasoning, is the one that won out? Instead of a reasoning machine, we have a prediction machine, one that can give you the best estimate of an answer based on what seems probable. It is agnostic to actual facts or actual meaning. The best it can do is replicate the past. When considering the political economy of this new constraining mechanism for the modern world, I find myself thinking of Mark Fisher and what he called the slow cancellation of the future. Fisher argued that under late capitalism, our ability to imagine genuine alternatives to the hegemonic economic system begins to erode. The future doesn't vanish all at once. It's quietly replaced by endless variations of the present. Recycled aesthetics, algorithmic nostalgia, a feedback loop for what already worked. Oh wait, too soon. In that sense, large-scale AI systems may represent a new phase of cancellation. Their predictive architectures don't generate new possibilities. They optimize existing patterns. They promise novelty while reproducing the past at industrial scale. The world becomes a data set, and the act of creation becomes an act of recall. Maybe this is what we could call AI realism, an ideology where it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of large language models. And as I think about it, this too feels familiar. The infrastructures of prediction are following the same trajectory as the infrastructures of communication. While the proliferation of the internet carried with it the utopian promises of openness, it has become a race toward concentration of data, of compute, of control. The dream of artificial intelligence is colliding with the same physical and economic constraints that shaped the internet. The story repeats itself, only at larger and more invisible scale. But not everyone has accepted this trajectory. We're sort of in this unknown territory. Some researchers, like Song-Chun Zhu, have already walked away from the West's obsession with scale. Zhu's work in cognitive AI seeks to bridge perception and reasoning, to build systems that understand the world, not just predict it. In a sense, he's returning to the original dream of symbolic AI, but without abandoning what deep learning has taught us. His vision of intelligence isn't a machine that mirrors the past, but one that can imagine futures. In that way, he represents a quiet rebellion against the predictive inertia of our time. A reminder here that even here, design is political. So, if I'm going to honor the process that guided my film, I should also take a little time to look at the physical infrastructure of our current AI paradigm. The growth of large language models is slowing. After years of exponential breakthroughs in replicating and predicting human speech and images, the progress is becoming more and more incremental. Recalling Vint Cerf's insight, we are once again being constrained by the demand for scale. The main AI corporations in the United States are struggling with stagnation, unable to scale their models at the same pace that they have for the past 5 years. The only way that they can guarantee growth to their shareholders is not through developing innovative new models, but by building bigger data centers, dramatically increasing their computation power. But the environmental costs are real. We are quite literally running out of world to feed into the machine. We have entered the stage of the PowerPoint where I ran out of visual ideas, so welcome to generic slides for the rest of the presentation. But maybe what's more concerning for me than the huge visible structures that are being built is to realize that these AI fever dreams, but maybe what's more concerning to me than the huge visible structures that are being built to realize these AI fever dreams is the invisible work that's happening beneath. As we feed more and more data into these machines and rely more and more on what they tell us, we are beginning to sideline the social and political institutions that were built up out of massive collective human effort, instead relying on the quick and easy answers that appear out of the simulacra. Decisions that were once made through deliberation, debate, and public responsibility are now made by optimization, by platforms, algorithms, and predictive models that answer to capital rather than to citizens. Infrastructure is becoming governance. And maybe this is what Mark Fisher meant by the slow cancellation of the future, the gradual erosion of collectively built institutions that take time and care to maintain, replaced by systems that optimize for efficiency and prediction. So in the end, the prompt remains clear. We must interrogate infrastructure. We must interrogate infrastructure because it's both a site of power and a mirror to ourselves. In looking closely at the systems that we build, we learn what we truly value, what we fear, and what kind of world we are willing to reproduce. Infrastructure is how our political commitments become real, how ideas turn into habits, protocols, and institutions. Thank you.
感谢迪伦·雷比林老师的分享。下面进行问答环节，请有问题的观众可以举手示意，我们的观众人员会将话筒递给您，谢谢。
Dylan, that was brilliant. Thank you. I want to ask a question that sort of connects your practical problem of how do you film the invisible with a sort of analytical question. To what extent do you think the invisibility is an intentional project of evading accountability?
Yeah.
You know, and can you just say something about not just that it is hidden, but that people are actively hiding things?
Well, it's funny because the idea of the cloud has a super interesting history. Like, it emerged in the early 90s from this company called General Magic. And they were trying to explain, we've all seen the memes online of people trying to describe the internet in the early 90s. Yeah, there's this new fad, internet, and we are going into the internet or going on, what it is and what we didn't have the words and couldn't figure it out. It was this communication infrastructure that no one was able to properly articulate until General Magic came along and was like, oh, we'll make it in the cloud. It sort of does this double work of being both abstract, taking all these wires and cables, but also simplifies it. So it's just this magical, beautiful, fluffy thing that we can all interact with. But this is in an era in the early 90s before cloud computing was something that we all was used to aggregate and an amazing, like the beneficiaries are Amazon and Google and all of the big tech platforms. So it's kind of this accident that worked out in all their favor because, yeah, when you talk about the cloud, it just feels like this, this like magical thing that like has no physical consequences or reality. And then you see like these massive data centers and it's like, oh, wait a second, what do you mean it takes a liter of water to ask, you know, ChatGPT, you know, what I should eat for lunch today? But yeah, it's sort of like the major platforms have lucked out. The one thing that's super interesting, and I kind of get into it in my film, is there are these this organization called Telegeography does these amazing maps of submarine cables around the world. And as soon as you introduce, every like year, someone discovers these maps and it becomes a meme. It goes viral for like a couple of days where it's like, what are you talking about? These are like submarine cables. And it blows people's minds repeatedly every year in these meme cycles that like, oh yeah, it's physical. It is like heartwarming to like, one of the things that people have commented coming away from my film is like, oh yeah, I forgot that the internet is physical. So like, it's heartening to me that people like, we like our world and everything in it, and seeing stuff concrete is actually very compelling to people. So we may be able to like reverse that like cloud image in our head, or that we have in our head. It'll take a lot of work, but I think people are primed for it. But it's like the work, I think it's important work just to remind ourselves of like sort of a secondary problem that I've had in this world, working on cyber war. Hacking, politics, national security, personal privacy. These are all the things that we dealt with. And communicating about data privacy, it's like almost like you hit this like this big collective shrug whenever you try and like talk to people about privacy and data integrity. People just hit it. People are like, oh yeah, that sounds bad, but if the cost is, or if what I get in exchange for this private data is convenience, people will go for convenience every time. So the problem is like these like hand-wringing arguments of like your data is not your own, you don't have personal sovereignty over this stuff. They go nowhere, they do not resonate with people. But what does resonate with people is I'm being manipulated, I'm being controlled, there are forces out there. And so like keeping that in mind is like, again, part of this work of like rematerializing the web. Like these are actual physical things that people control. That's someone else's cable and they're using it to manipulate you. That's something that has resonance. So it's important to keep that in mind when, you know, dealing with like the blank look on people's faces when you're like, you know, data sovereignty is like an important human right or whatever. Remembering that like what people respond to is like something I got to keep in mind.
还有提问的吗？如果想提问的举手示意，工作人员会将麦克风递给您。
Thank you for your brilliant work. I was wondering, in the projects you have followed, and if the centralized efforts finally led to like decentralized efforts finally led to decentralized outcomes, or they just end up like being centralized again, like the internet, or just some central and powerful actors re-emerge from this process. Can you share with us some of the cases?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big struggles with all of these decentralization projects is centralization makes money. Decentralization does not. So following all these people, they're building these projects out of like sheer force of will, you know, like they want to enact these systems that they think will make for a better world. And so they pour their heart and soul into a project, but they're competing against Google and Facebook or Meta, and it's hard to like get traction when you don't. There's like a lot of burnout in the community. Like a project will make great strides and then collapse because the person decides that they want to pay rent, or they need to get a job to like support, like put food on their table, that sort of thing. And one of the, I didn't talk about it here, but one of the people that I show in my film is trying to get a decentralized social media app up and running. And so we see him trying to pull together like a pitch session that's ultimately, unsuccessful. Again, one of the things that gives me hope is that with each one of these projects, there's like a kernel of an idea that leads to someone else making like another change, or people are constantly building on this. So it's long and slow and incremental, but at the flip side of it is some of these people are funded by just buying Bitcoin in 2007 and having like massive bank accounts that allow them to just do whatever vanity project they want. Yeah, so there is hope, but it's long and slow and unpredictable.
谢谢。还有最后一个问题，还有观众想提问的吗？
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And I got a question, because we're talking about centralization and decentralization, but is it possible decentralization, when viewed from a different scale, could become centralization? I'm saying, is it possible there's no opposition between centralization and decentralization? It becomes a matter of scale, your perspective, and where you stand. So regarding the standing point, and another question related to this is, how could we actually defamiliarize ourselves from the technology? Because if you think about the on-hand idea, McLuhan basically says the technology will disappear, fade into invisibility over time. Mm-hmm. So how could we possibly use art or data or datafied or digital methods to defamiliarize ourselves with the technology so that we can stand back a little bit and interrogate the infrastructure? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there's two things. I think you make a really good point about sort of this weird dynamic between centralization and decentralization. The book that I showed a slide of, Alexander Galloway's Protocol, talks about how there is this sort of like paradox of like, how does control exist after decentralization? Well, a protocol is actually like a very it's an agreed upon set of rules that you have to abide by, otherwise your system doesn't work. So whoever creates the protocol is like the centralized force that designs the world that people build on or play in. So it is this sort of tense dynamic that we need to be very conscious of, because some of the decentralization protocols, well, I'll leave it at that, and then go on to the other question, which is how do we defamiliarize ourselves? One of the things from these centralized paradigms. Sort of one of the questions that sort of my film ends up with is well, okay, decentralization is actually really complicated. It's a tool for emancipation, but it can lead to isolation and the abdication of social or communal values. And so what comes after these centralized platforms? And one of the things that didn't make it into my film, but I've seen a number of people looking at the centralized platforms and what they offer us, which is these grand communal spaces. What's the opposite of that? How can we flee these grand platforms, and what does that look like? And there's this movement interested in the dark forest theory of the internet. So the idea of the dark forest is based on the book by Cixin Liu called The Dark Forest. It's part 2 of that comes after the 3-body problem. And in that book, The Dark Forest, Liu talks about how the world, the universe is like a dark forest. Around every corner lurks danger. So the best thing that you can do to protect yourself is to remain quiet, remain in your like small social, like isolated community. And people are starting to apply this to the internet, having like federated systems, like being on a secret Discord server where the only people that you're communicating with are people who are within your like context group. There's like a shared understanding of the world, and everyone kind of roughly knows each other. So I think being aware of the constraints of these corporate platforms and centralized platforms can give us the imagination on how to escape them.
感谢迪伦·雷比里营老师的分享。下面进入茶歇环节，我们15分钟后继续。不好意思，没看到。
Yeah, thank you for your great presentation. I have two slightly related questions. You can choose one or both. One is, do you have a sense of why the most socially successful project took place in Catalonia? And the other one is that there is this kind of implicit techno-determinist idea that kind of the structure of the infrastructure shapes directly the social structure built on top of it. And so the related question would be, can you think of a socially decentralized system working on a centralized infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if like Wikipedia or Reddit is a good example. I mean, the case with Catalonia, like I tried to tease this out of them. Like, is there something to the like Catalan like spirit that like leads itself to being full on on decentralized networks? And like my own instinct is like the history of like anarchism and socialist co-ops in Spain, like Mondragon and like other like sort of socialist corporate mixes, means they're more open to like anarcho-syndicalist ideas. So I think there's just more of a history and culture there. Whether you and I did press people on this in the film, and they're a little bit more reluctant. I think they don't want it to seem like, oh, it's a Spanish idea or like it's something cultural. And then the second question, I mean, I don't know. Like there is the possibility for like gaming systems, like I think about like different communities' usages of Instagram, like people who have Finsta accounts, like fake accounts, or like shared accounts, or like group accounts that play with like the meta text of like internet. Like, I don't know if you followed like the intellectuals movement where everyone tapped selectuals onto the end of their Instagram feed, signaling that they were part of like this ideological cohort that was like shit posters and like ironic memeing. So there are ways to play with that, or like there's this practice of like naming your Instagram account to reflect how many times you've been banned, like Dylan Reibling the second or Dylan Reibling the third, like based on like how many times you've posted objectionable material and been taken down by Instagram terms of service. So there's like metatextual things. Yeah, those are the things that come to mind right off the bat. All right, coffee and water.
.那我们下面就进行茶歇环节吧，我们15分钟之后继续。谢谢大家，谢谢敌人 ，Thank you。嘉宾也下去吗？对。 茶歇在1楼，大家可以 one fourth。同传在1楼茶歇。在1楼茶歇。
我们在1楼为大家准备了茶歇和咖啡，然后洗手间的话，在1楼茶歇处向右转，然后大家可以自行安排，15分钟后请回到会场，谢谢。
我们继续会议，下一位发言嘉宾是乔安娜·摩尔老师。乔安娜·摩尔老师是一位常驻巴塞罗那和柏林的艺术家和研究者，他的项目曾在全球多个重要场域展出。他的作品批判性地审视技术资本主义叙事。他的演讲主题是“内在的见面”。乔安娜·摩尔老师在西班牙巴塞罗那与我们线上连线，有请。
Hello? I can't see anybody. Hello?
Hi, Joanna.
Hi. No, I can't see anyone. I'm like...
Hi, Joanna， 我们正在调试，可能要稍等一下。Hi, Joanna， 我们正在调试，可能要稍等一下。
No, I can't see people.
谢谢。
Yeah, should I start?
可以了 ，OK， 你可以开始你的演讲，谢谢。
Okay. Hello, everybody. I would love to be there. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'll really do my best. Yeah, and also the setup is a bit strange because I don't really see myself in the screen, and I see people but just from the side. So apologies if it's I do weird things at some point. Okay, now I see myself. Oh wow, this is very big. Hi, Felix. It's funny that you asked the question about the Catalan case because I'm in Barcelona right now and I'm Catalan. It was also an interesting answer actually. So, well, I'm gonna share my screen, see how this will work. Some technicians, I don't think I can share my screen. Okay, now I can. Yeah, well, I need to send a request though. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm gonna talk. Okay, can you see the full screen? Because I'm not sure exactly if you're seeing like my whole. Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're seeing because I cannot really see it. Okay, that's not it. Just a second.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
We can see it. It's very clear.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, now I see what you're seeing. It's like I have my notes somewhere, but I will do, yeah, okay, perfect. I can still have it here, like that. Oh, yeah, I hate these things, sorry. Okay, so if I manage, I'm going to talk about something that I've been developing throughout the years, but especially I worked very intensively in the last 2 or 3 years, which is the increasing militarization of civil society through the use of digital media. And I've been tackling this very much from the body. So I did a lot of embodied research on the topic and just trying to understand how ideologies are being transcribed into the body and how we reproduce them with very simple movements, very simple gestures, basically just analyzing all these gestures before creating data and what's happening to the body. Generally, my work, I've been always checking what's happening beyond the interface, and now I'm just trying to understand what's happening before the interface, right? That's the body, which is yet sort of another interface, but without the body, there is not really data. Yeah, there is machines that produce data for each other, there is synthetic data, blah, 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 but still, right? And I would like to start this talk doing some sort of archaeological review of how I started with this topic, with something that I think is particularly pertinent right now. I just came back from the US, where I was stopped at the border just because I went to give some talks, so it was nice. And it made me think a lot about this project that I'm gonna show now. It's called the Virtual Watchers. I did it in 2016 in collaboration with French anthropologist Cédric Parisot. And it looked at a group of virtual watchers, like regular citizens, that were monitoring the US-Mexico border from the internet and through basically a commercial website. This group was called Blue Cerebro, like not the group, like the website, and it operated between 2008 and 2012, 13, more or less. It was publicly and privately funded by the state of Texas, and the main aim of this platform was an experiment to crowdsource national security from, and also translate the responsibility to watch the borders from the armory, the border patrol, from the government in general, to the citizens, to civilians. And I found this was very, very purposeful, especially the way it was designed as a website that was supposed to be self-sustained through advertising, which also thinking, in retrospective, it's very interesting because in 2008, ad tech, which is now the main business model of the internet, was not the main business model of the internet there. It was important, but not as much as it is now, right? And there was already this idea of mixing advertising with data extraction, with sustaining like a surveillance platform. So like there was a lot of concepts that later on, after the years, just got together, but then there were just like sketches like here and there of things that would come. And I think that this platform was really looking at the future much more than I could understand back then. So that was essentially the website. It went down for a few years. Now I think it's online again. So you had like the main entrance, the slide I showed before, that was the welcome back to Blue Cerebro. You didn't even have to sign in. So it was really open and free. And then there you had like a huge archive of videos of detained people that was detained thanks to the efforts of all these volunteer watchers online. And then you had like, I think it was a total of 25 cameras that you could basically see, watch online and see what was going on. This is like a reproduction of the site because it's not, I did not take screenshots when I had to, classic. So this I just reproduced it with some material I found in the internet, but it really looked pretty much like that. Just the advertising is not there. Yeah, there were some Amazon banners originally and so on. So you had, this was like the surveillance website. So you had these 2 cameras, and then you could choose which cameras you could surveil, and then there were very detailed instructions on the bottom of each camera and what you initially had to look at. Yeah, and this is how basically it looked like. So you could make a comment, you could ask a question, or you could report suspicious activities. Yeah? And anything that you would report would go directly to the sheriff office, to the local sheriff office. So what's interesting, it's like, according to Blue Cerebro, the platform had 165 million hits and more than 200,000 users which represent more than 1 million hours of free labors for the sheriff. Also, it's interesting that only 10% of the users were from international sources. And the sheriff, they claim that they had made more than 5,000 interdictions from 2008 to 2012. But if we look at numbers of the Department of Homeland Security, how many people they detained in 2011 alone, it was more than 500,000 people, right? So what this says is that this platform was very ineffective in terms of stopping illegal immigration and crime in the border, but it was very effective in terms of keeping a lot of people monitoring the border from their homes, which I think that's also quite interesting. And this is what really caught my attention. So my first question after I saw this was, okay, but why is these people doing this? Why would they spend so much time, monitoring the US-Mexico border, right? Well, first it was fun. The interface was very much gamified. It looked like a video game, really, but it also gave you like a lot of power. Yeah? It was a really purpose feeling, actually. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk more about this later. Also, something I forgot to say, like the sheriffs, when the platform shut down, they were very happy because they said it was a disaster, that they mostly got reports from cows and things that didn't make any sense. So after digging and trying to understand who was behind this platform and the users, like the regular citizens, I found a Facebook group where users from Blue Server would communicate with each other. Because in the platform, there is something you could not do back then, which was chat with each other. So this Facebook platform was open again, I think 2010, and it ran until 2013. And I created this character, Marianne Smith, and I sort of very softly infiltrated the group. She was a super patriot. She was like a very exaggerated character, and I was also surprised that they bought it. So there was interactions like this, like, yay, what's going on camera one? Then I could see something moving, but I'm not sure if it's an alien. Then I saw lots of activity about an hour ago, several people moving back and forth between the white building and the riverbank. Yeah, hope none of them go to the US, etc., etc., etc. Right? The thing is, like, you could not really see anything in the cameras. You did not even understand where was the US, where was Mexico, where the people were fishing, where there were Mexicans. Women, male, kids, you could not identify absolutely anything. Sorry?
No, please continue.
Okay, thank you. So together with this anthropologist, Cedric Parisot, we analyzed all this data from Facebook. We downloaded all the posts, all the images. We analyzed every single profile of every user there, and we created this sort of experimental online documentary that is an archive of everything that happened there. So, for example, these comments that were pretty racist in most cases, like haven't seen any Mexicans yet, pretty pumped about reporting my first Yeah, there was this guy, he was an Italian chef that lived in Chicago, and he was very much into doing screenshots, do not report cows, just giving tips to people how to monitor the border better. Yeah, this is, again, more screenshots saying where, pointing out that people crossing, but in fact, you would not know if this was the US or if it was Mexico. It was really, really difficult to understand. And also, it was very difficult to understand even the cameras were in real time. And I think what's also quite striking about this, and this is something that might not surprise us now, but we're talking about 2016, and this was 2008, 12, when Snowden revelations did not happen yet. And we could identify a lot of the lives of the people, where they were living, family, relations they had, jobs, anything, a lot of things. Even where they were living, so this is a map of all the locations of the people that were part of the group. There were a total of 300 or 400 people that was part of this group. And what's interesting is, like, even though they were highly recognizable, because they were in Facebook, giving out all their lives that were much more recognizable than the people that they were looking over. And we call this sort of a post-panopticon effect, because when you were looking at the cameras, as I said before, you could not identify people. You could not even identify gender, you could not identify nationality, you couldn't even identify like the site of the territory, right? But any of these people that were attempting to cross the border, they could go on Facebook and look at all these people and understand their lives. Yeah? And then you understand how the internet, it's also hinting at this part of the internet, how it became the biggest open source of intelligence in the world. And this is not something that I say, it's something that a high official from the United States government said around 2015, right? And this is very much thanks to ad tech, data extraction, and the rise of and these monopolies of tech platforms, which I'm gonna talk about it now. Okay, give me a second because I need to organize my slides. So this is like my most recent sort of research project. It's gonna be turned into an opera soon. That's my aim. It's called The User and the Beast. The opera is gonna have a different name because I use this for something else. But it tackles embodied research, materiality surveillance, data extraction, and militarization. And before I get into the theme, then we need to get familiar just with a couple of terms. At-int, something that I sort of started to talk about just right now, which is a term that describes intelligence gathering through the purchase of online ads. And the term was observed initially in 2017 by a group of researchers at the University of Washington in the US. And we can talk a little bit about this after, but basically it's exactly this. It's about ad tech, which is the main business model of the internet. It's the main revenue stream for companies like Facebook or Google, for example. And it's just basically the responsible of that so many data is being extracted and commercialized, traded in from users, right? That's basically what's fueling basically some of the most powerful companies in the world, but it's something that it's very invisible because you don't really understand what's happening behind the interface, right? Then something that's also really, or like something that happened that was very important in 2001, as we all know, most of the people, I guess, that we are here, we are old enough. It was the 9/11 attack. So commercial companies, let's say data brokers, which are those companies that trade in data, were not really merged with the military industry. This is something that's been happening throughout the years. It's a relationship that got very much reinforced after 9/11. What happened during 9/11, one of the major failure acknowledged by the US government that didn't allow them to prevent the attacks from happening was this lack of communication flows between different agencies. And after this happened,